The night was supposed to be calm, just another midnight patrol beneath a sky heavy with silence. The soldiers moved in formation, their boots crunching against gravel and dirt, their rifles steady at their sides. But there was something strange about the air. It carried no sound of crickets, no rustle of trees, only a stillness that pressed harder with every step. Then came the whisper, faint and broken, like wings slicing through the wind. At first they thought it was imagination, fatigue playing cruel tricks. But when the shadow passed above them, blotting out the moon for a heartbeat, they froze. What they thought was a bird, a bat, or just a trick of darkness, revealed itself with a piercing cry that didn't belong to anything human. And by the time they realized what hovered above the Manananggal, it was already too late. The night carried a weight that none of the soldiers could explain. Midnight had settled over the land like a heavy curtain, blotting out even the stars above. Their orders were clear: sweep the outskirts, ensure no threats approach the perimeter, and return before dawn. Simple, routine, something they had done 100 times before. And yet, as they lined up and began to march, each man felt the air tighten in his chest, as though the darkness itself pressed against them. It wasn't fear of war, it was fear of something unseen. Boots crunched rhythmically on the gravel, the sound echoing too loudly in the emptiness. Normally such noise gave comfort, proof of unity, proof they were not alone. But tonight it felt like an invitation, as though each step announced their presence to something lurking beyond sight. The soldier in the rear adjusted his rifle uneasily, his eyes scanning the tree line, though he could swear nothing moved there. It wasn't the enemy they'd been trained for, it was silence. The sergeant barked a command, keeping them steady, his voice sharp and clipped. But even his tone, usually brimming with control, cracked slightly under the strain. His hand lingered longer than usual on the trigger guard of his weapon, a subtle tremor betraying unease. He had marched in countless operations, through jungles and cities, through bullets and fire. Yet tonight the forest unsettled him in a way artillery never could. The men noticed, and their dread deepened. The moon hung pale in the sky, casting a dim glow that stretched shadows into unnatural lengths. Trees leaned over the path, their branches clawing together like skeletal hands, forming a canopy that swallowed the light. Snow dusted the ground in patches, and though the cold nipped at their skin, it was not the frost that made them shiver. It was the strange stillness, the unnatural quiet that replaced every expected sound of night. No crickets, no owls, no rustle of leaves, only emptiness. A younger soldier whispered a prayer, his words trembling with every syllable. Normally, the sergeant would have silenced him with a sharp glare or punishment, but this time he let it go. Perhaps he understood that the prayer was not weakness, but instinct, a desperate attempt to shield against something he too could not name. The soldier beside him shifted uneasily, his knuckles white against the grip of his rifle. None of them dared to laugh it off. The patrol pressed on, but every step felt heavier, more reluctant. Discipline forced their bodies forward, yet instinct screamed for them to stop. The soldier at the front tightened his pack and tried to focus on the task at hand. But the deeper they marched, the more the air itself seemed to thicken. Breathing became a task, as though the forest sucked the oxygen from their lungs. Sweat trickled beneath their uniforms despite the chill. Their senses were on fire. One soldier stumbled briefly on uneven ground, his boots snapping against a hidden root. The noise echoed louder than it should have, cracking like a shot in the frozen silence. Instantly, rifles jerked up, fingers tightening on triggers, eyes darting in every direction, but nothing moved. The forest remained still, the shadows deep, the silence suffocating. They lowered their weapons slowly, but unease lingered like smoke after fire. Every nerve told them they had been heard. The soldier at the rear felt it most keenly, the sensation of being followed. He turned sharply more than once, his rifle raised, his heart pounding in his ears. Yet nothing ever stood behind them. Nothing ever broke the curtain of shadows. And yet the feeling never left. It grew stronger with every minute, a gnawing certainty that their patrol was not alone. He dared not speak it aloud. The others already felt it too. The path narrowed further, pressing them into tighter formation. Branches clawed at their helmets and packs, scraping metal with brittle fingers. Snow drifted from the canopy in faint spirals, melting against their gloves and rifles. The soldier glanced upward once, swearing he saw movement between the branches, shapes darker than the night itself, shifting silently. He blinked, forcing himself to believe it was imagination, but imagination did not make his pulse race like prey before a predator. The sergeant raised his hand abruptly, signaling for a halt. Boots froze in unison, rifles lifted. The men scanned the tree line, eyes sharp, breath shallow. For a long, tense moment, nothing moved. Then came the faintest sound, softer than a whisper, like wings slicing through the still air. It lasted only a second, but it was enough. The sergeant's jaw tightened, his hand trembling slightly as he lowered it. He gave no explanation, only the order to continue. But the damage was done. The soldier thought of stories he had once dismissed, tales whispered by locals around fires, about creatures that fed on flesh and fear, monsters that flew under the cover of night. He had laughed at them once. Now, trudging through the suffocating silence, the laughter felt distant, hollow. The old stories crept back into his mind, sharper than bullets, louder than commands. He tried to bury them, but the forest seemed to breathe those stories into his ear. Their breaths formed clouds of mist that lingered too long, hanging in the air like specters. The soldier began to feel as though the forest was not simply quiet, but listening, watching, waiting. Each exhale felt like a signal, each crunch of boots like an offering. His fingers ached from gripping his weapon so tightly, but letting go was impossible. Steel was his only anchor to sanity, even if it was useless against what stalked them. The younger soldier whispered again, asking if anyone else felt it, that gaze from above. His voice cracked, brittle as glass, and his words were met with silence. None dared answer. To admit it would make it real. Yet every man felt it. Their eyes drifted upward against their will, scanning the treetops, expecting at any moment for the shadows to unravel into something monstrous. Their pace quickened, not by command but by fear. The deeper they went, the darker it grew. The moonlight was swallowed by branches, the world reduced to shades of black and gray. The soldier felt as though the forest had closed around them completely, sealing them inside a cage of wood and shadow. He tried to steady his breath, to focus on training, but training offered no guidance for this. How do you fight what you cannot see? How do you prepare for an enemy that defies the rules of war? Minutes stretched into eternities. The patrol moved, but no one remembered how far they had gone, how long they had walked. Time seemed to bend, stretch, dissolve in the silence. The soldier's boots grew heavy, his mind clouded by unease. The forest was not merely a setting, it was an enemy, alive and ancient, feeding on their fear. Every step deeper felt like surrender to its hunger. A sudden gust of wind cut through the path, carrying with it a sound, not words, not laughter, but something in between, a broken murmur, a sigh carried on invisible wings. The soldier's heart froze in his chest. He turned sharply, scanning the branches overhead, but saw nothing. Yet the sound lingered, etched into his mind. He could not mistake it. Something was flying above them. The sergeant tried to steady them, his voice louder now, commanding calm. But the men's eyes betrayed them. Their discipline was unraveling, frayed by shadows and silence. Fear had carved itself into their bones, deeper than any enemy bullet ever had. They were not soldiers now. They were prey. And every man knew it. The soldier thought of home, of warmth, of safety far from the endless dark. But even those thoughts turned bitter. The memory of safety only made the present more terrifying, more hopeless. The forest gave no comfort, only reminders that this patrol was never meant to succeed. Perhaps it had never been a mission at all. Perhaps it was a march into death, signed by orders but sealed by fate. When the whisper came again, louder this time, every man froze, eyes darted to the sky, rifles raised, breaths caught in throats. The soldier's stomach turned to ice as the sound transformed. Less whisper now, more wings slicing the air with hunger. The treetops shifted, branches groaning under unseen weight. The soldier understood then. This was not paranoia. This was presence. Something was above them. And though no shape had yet revealed itself, the truth was undeniable. The patrol had not simply entered the forest. They had crossed into something's territory. The silence had been the first warning, the whispers, the second. And now, as the wings brushed against the night sky, the soldier realized the cruel truth. The midnight patrol was not hunting for enemies. It had become the hunted. The patrol had pressed deeper into the forest when the first sign appeared, not sound, not movement, but absence. The moon, which had been their only companion, shone through a break in the canopy, pale and distant. For a moment its light comforted them, chasing away the thick shadows, but then in the span of a heartbeat, that light was blotted out. Something vast and winged swept across it, casting the soldiers into sudden darkness. The shadow moved too quickly for the eye to follow, a blur that devoured the moon and vanished into the trees. The soldier's pulse surged, his breath catching in his throat. He had seen birds before, owls, bats, but this was no bird. It was too large, too deliberate, its outline unmistakably human, yet horribly distorted. He turned to his comrades, searching their faces for denial, but their pale expressions told him they had seen it too. The sergeant snapped for discipline, his voice sharp as a whip, but even he struggled to hide his unease. His eyes lingered on the treetops, his hand twitching near the trigger of his rifle. He barked in order to keep moving, yet his tone betrayed something unusual, fear disguised as authority. The soldiers obeyed, but their formation faltered. Each man tilted his head upward, waiting, dreading the moment the shadow would return. The forest pressed heavier now, every branch and shadow seeming to lean closer. Snowflakes drifted lazily through the air, but when the soldier looked up, he saw they twisted strangely, as if disturbed by something unseen passing just above. He clenched his jaw, his grip on his weapon aching, but no bullet could strike what could not be seen. The air itself felt haunted, vibrating with the memory of wings. One soldier muttered under his breath, insisting it was a bird, nothing more. The words were weak, brittle, a desperate attempt at reason, but the silence that followed proved no one believed it. Birds did not block out the moon. Birds did not cast shadows shaped like people, and birds did not circle in silence. Waiting, watching, testing the courage of men below. Whatever flew above was not of nature. It was something else. The soldier in the rear thought he heard the faint flap of wings, steady, rhythmic, circling beyond sight. He turned sharply, scanning the treetops, but the canopy revealed nothing. Yet he felt it, a pressure in his chest, as though the sky itself bore weight. He exhaled, and the mist of his breath lingered unnaturally, twisting upward like smoke pulled by an unseen current. The realization hit him hard. The thing wasn't gone, it was directly above them. The sergeant ordered them to quicken their pace, his voice cracking slightly. The men obeyed, boots striking faster against the snow. Their breaths came in harsh bursts, their rifles swaying as nerves frayed. The patrol was no longer orderly. It was a march of hunted men trying desperately to pretend they were in control. The soldier hated the sound of his own heartbeat, for it seemed loud enough to call the thing down. Then it happened again. The moonlight broke through the canopy, a silver circle in the sky, only to be devoured once more. The shadow streaked across, slower this time, deliberate. Its outline was clearer, a torso, arms stretched unnaturally wide, wings extending like torn sails. For a brief, terrible instant, the soldier saw the curve of its head tilt downward, as if watching them. His stomach dropped. The thing wasn't just flying, it was studying. Fear rippled through the squad, though no one dared speak. The silence between them was louder than gunfire, each man swallowing the scream that clawed at his throat. They marched on, but discipline had cracked. The soldier noticed his comrade's hands trembling so violently the rifle barrel shook. He thought of steadying him, of whispering some reassurance, but the words died before they left his mouth. There was nothing to say. The soldier remembered old stories told in hushed tones, tales of creatures that split their bodies in half, leaving their torsos to fly with wings like leather and claws like knives. He had dismissed them as folklore, superstition for villages that feared the night, but the shape crossing the moon bore no resemblance to animals. It matched the stories too closely. He bit his tongue until it bled, as if pain might anchor him to reality. The sergeant raised his fist for another halt. The patrol froze instantly, rifles snapping upward, barrels glinting in the dim light. They aimed into the treetops, searching desperately for movement. Snow crunched under boots as men shifted uneasily, their breath fogging the air in frantic bursts. The soldier's eyes darted everywhere at once, trying to catch the slightest sign of wings. His heart hammered against his ribs, screaming at him to fire. But at what? The forest answered with silence, heavy and deliberate. The shadow did not pass again. The moon shone unbroken, cold and distant, mocking their fear, but the soldier knew better. The silence wasn't relief, it was pause. The thing had revealed itself twice, and both times only enough to feed their terror. Now it was waiting, patient, circling unseen, knowing that fear itself would weaken them more than any attack. One man whispered that they should turn back. His words were sharp, desperate, louder than he intended. The sound echoed unnaturally, bouncing between trees until it seemed to come from everywhere. The sergeant turned, fury in his eyes, but before he could scold the soldier, another sound sliced through the night. A screech, faint but sharp like metal tearing apart, drifted from above. Every man froze, blood draining from their faces. The soldier's gaze snapped upward, but the canopy swallowed the sky. He saw only the faint glow of the moon through branches, pale and trembling. The screech came again, closer this time, and it carried hunger in every note. The sound wasn't made by wind or animal. It was something with lungs, with malice, with intent. The soldier gritted his teeth, his breath shallow as dread coiled tighter around his heart. The squad tightened formation, rifles raised, eyes darting wildly. The sergeant whispered orders now, his voice low, as though speaking louder might invite attack. The men moved carefully, their boots pressing softer into the snow. The soldier felt sweat bead on his brow despite the chill. He wiped it away quickly, ashamed of his own trembling, but courage was not enough. Instinct screamed at him, something was about to strike. The moon broke free once more, casting light into a clearing ahead. The men marched faster, desperate for space, for sky. But as they stepped into the open, relief turned instantly to horror. The shadow fell again, vast and unmistakable, stretching across the snow like a predator's claws. The soldier's stomach churned as he realized the truth. This was no random circling, it was hurting. The creature was driving them forward. The clearing felt like a trap, a stage set for the inevitable. The moonlight painted everything in silver, every soldier exposed, every weapon useless against what flew above. The shadow cut across the snow again, slower, deliberate, its edges sharp against the light. This time, the soldiers saw more than shape. They saw details, a gaunt torso, a face half hidden, twisted in hunger, wings that stretched wider than the trees themselves. The sergeant shouted for readiness, but his words cracked under strain. The men raised their rifles, aiming at the sky, fingers quivering on triggers. The soldier's breath burned in his lungs, every second stretching into eternity. The shadow circled again, its cry ripping through the silence, shrill and merciless. The forest echoed with the sound, and every man understood what it meant. They were no longer soldiers on patrol. They were prey under the moon. The soldier's vision blurred with fear, but he forced himself to aim upward. He steadied his rifle, though his arms shook, his body begging to flee. He thought of home, of warmth, of laughter, things that belonged to another world far from this frozen nightmare. Above, the shadow swooped lower, blotting out the moon entirely. The soldier's heart clenched, for in that instant, there was no doubt left. The Manananggal was real, and it had chosen this midnight as the hour of its hunt. The clearing had offered no safety, only exposure, and so the patrol pressed back into the forest, rifles raised, eyes darting nervously skyward. But now the silence had changed. It was no longer just stillness, it was filled with sound, faint and sinister. High above, carried on the cold wind, came the steady, rhythmic beat of wings. Not the chaotic flutter of bats, not the graceful glide of birds, but something heavier, purposeful, stalking. The soldier froze mid-step as the noise swept overhead, brushing through the canopy like invisible blades. He looked up, but the branches blocked the sky, leaving only hints of movement between gaps. The sound lingered, low and steady, circling again, as if tracing their path. His chest tightened. This was no random flight pattern. The thing above them was pacing their every move, shadowing them like a predator that already knew the outcome. The men shifted uneasily, their formation cracking as instincts warred with orders. The sergeant raised his hand sharply, signaling silence. But discipline had already frayed. One man's breathing came too fast, too loud, drawing sharp glares from the others. The soldier clenched his jaw, fighting to calm his own pulse. But then the wings swept overhead again, closer this time, the rush of air audible even through the snow. Their silence was meaningless. The creature already knew where they were. Every few steps, the wings returned. Sometimes a distant sweep, sometimes a low rush that rattled the branches. Each pass was deliberate, growing bolder, as though the thing above was testing them, mocking their helplessness. The soldier thought of wolves circling prey before the kill, but this was worse. Wolves were beasts of flesh and instinct. This was intelligence cloaked in shadow, a hunter that enjoyed the unraveling of courage. The forest itself seemed to bend to the rhythm of those wings. The trees creaked in unnatural harmony. The snow fell in spirals instead of flakes, as though the very air was stirred by a force it shouldn't obey. The soldier tilted his head back, straining to catch a glimpse, and for the briefest moment he saw it, a dark shape sliding between branches, wings stretching wider than the trunks themselves. His stomach knotted. It wasn't circling anymore, it was descending. The squad tightened instinctively, shoulders brushing as fear bound them closer together. Rifles rose higher, eyes scanning the slivers of moonlight above, but the forest offered no clear shot. The wings whispered through the branches again, so close that frost shook loose and drifted down like dust. The soldier inhaled sharply, every hair on his body rising. The sound wasn't just above them anymore. It was all around them, threading through the forest like a noose. One man whispered that it was gone, a desperate attempt to break the tension, but the soldier knew better. He pressed a finger to his lips, urging silence, but the damage was already done. As if on cue, the wings rushed past again, impossibly low, rattling the treetops until branches cracked and snow cascaded over their helmets. The sound was deafening, deliberate, like a laugh echoing in motion. No, it hadn't left. It was playing with them. The sergeant ordered a halt, raising his fist sharply. The squad froze, rifles fixed upward, bodies trembling. The forest went silent for a heartbeat, and for a moment hope sparked, but then came a new sound, the hiss of something gliding lower, slicing through the air with deadly precision. The soldier's heart hammered. He wanted to fire, to scream, to do anything, but his body locked in place. The wings whispered again, slower this time, closer, as if brushing just above their heads. The soldier swore he felt it, a faint gust ruffling the hair beneath his helmet, the icy breath of the creature that hunted them. His skin crawled, his stomach churned. He dared not look up, but every instinct screamed that if he did, glowing eyes would be staring back. He gripped his rifle so tightly his knuckles burned, silently praying the thing would pass. But prayer had no place here. The wings whispered again, deliberate, taunting, circling like a vulture savoring its feast. The squad broke formation without command. Men stepped closer to one another, rifles shaking, eyes wild with terror. The sergeant hissed for them to hold steady, but even his voice faltered. Authority meant little under the sound of those wings. The soldier's heart ached at the sight of hardened men, reduced to prey, their courage stripped with every sweep above. The forest was no longer a place of trees and snow. It was a cage, and they were trapped inside. Then came the cry. A piercing wail tore through the air, neither bird nor beast, but something between scream and shriek. It reverberated through the trees, rattling their chests, shaking snow loose from branches. The soldier dropped to one knee, hands pressed to his ears, but the sound still seeped through, gnawing at his bones. His comrades staggered, their rifles lowering instinctively as they fought against the noise. The wings had whispered before. Now they screamed. The shriek ended as suddenly as it began, leaving only silence and the ragged breaths of terrified men. The soldier's ears rang, his body trembling, his vision swimming. He pushed himself back to his feet, rifle raised again, though his strength had drained with the cry. Above, the wings returned to whispers, circling once more. But the soldier realized the truth. The sound wasn't random. It was communication. The creature was announcing its hunger. Snow swirled harder now, driven by a sudden wind that seemed to follow the rhythm of the wings. The flakes caught in the pale moonlight, spiraling down like ash. The soldier blinked against the storm, his eyes stinging, but through the haze he thought he saw it, something vast and hunched, gliding just beyond sight. The image was fleeting, gone as quickly as it appeared, but it was enough. The Manananggal was no longer legend. It was here. The men whispered prayers, fragments of faith slipping from trembling lips. Some begged for dawn, others begged for courage, but the soldier said nothing. Words felt dangerous, like offerings that might attract attention. He stood rigid, breath shallow, ears straining for the wings. They came again, brushing overhead, deliberate and cruel. He closed his eyes, not from surrender, but from grim acceptance. They were marked. The sergeant gave the order to move again, his voice hoarse and uneven. The squad stumbled forward, their formation broken beyond repair. Each man walking with the haunted knowledge that death followed above. The wings whispered constantly now, never letting them forget. Sometimes fast, sometimes slow, sometimes brushing so close that the air itself trembled. The soldier realized then that they weren't moving forward by choice. They were being driven, herded deeper into the forest. Branches cracked overhead as the creature shifted closer, its weight pressing against trunks too thin to support it. The soldier glanced upward and caught another glimpse. Elongated arms, wings stretching wider than seemed possible, a face half shrouded in shadow. His heart clenched. He knew then why the wings whispered instead of roared. The creature wasn't attacking yet. It was savoring the anticipation. The soldier's comrades stumbled, falling to one knee with a cry. The sound carried too loud, too sharp. Instantly, the wings rushed overhead again, circling tighter, faster, the air vibrating with hunger. The soldier lunged forward, yanking his comrade up. But the message was clear. The thing above didn't want them to collapse. Not yet. It wanted them alive long enough to taste every drop of fear. The patrol pressed on, their boots dragging, their breaths shallow. The wings never stopped. Always circling, always whispering. The soldier felt his sanity fray with every pass, his mind splintering under the relentless sound. He bit his tongue until he tasted blood, forcing himself to focus, to endure. But endurance had limits, and the Manananggal knew how to push men to their breaking point. Finally, the soldier understood the cruel truth. The wings weren't just sound. They were a weapon. Each whisper stripped their courage, each pass drained their resolve, each shriek hollowed their souls. The forest wasn't the battlefield. The battlefield was inside them, and the enemy that wasn't human knew exactly how to win. By the time the wings faded into silence once more, the damage had been done. The soldiers were no longer warriors. They were prey, broken, waiting for the strike, and above them, hidden in the dark, the Manananggal smiled. The first shriek came without warning, tearing across the tree line like a blade splitting silence. It wasn't the cry of any animal the soldiers had ever heard. It was layered, sharp, and raw, as though 100 voices screamed in unison from one mouth. The sound vibrated through the snow, rattling rifles, shaking bones, and burning into the soldiers' ears with a force no training could prepare them for. The soldier dropped to one knee instinctively, his hands clamped to his helmet, but the noise cut straight through. It wasn't just sound, it was pain, a piercing wave that seemed to gnaw at the inside of his skull. His teeth ached, his vision blurred, and his chest convulsed with every pulse of that terrible cry. The forest itself seemed to tremble, branches quivering, snow falling like ash from a sky that no longer felt safe. Around him, men staggered under the invisible weight of the scream. Some fell, clutching at their ears, while others swayed as though drunk on terror. The sergeant bellowed for order, but even his voice was drowned in the cacophony. His words dissolved into meaningless noise, swallowed by the monstrous shriek that seemed endless, unrelenting, and deliberately cruel. The soldier tried to steady himself, forcing his body to rise despite the tremors running through his legs. But the sound carried more than just volume. It carried intent. With every note, it pushed into his mind, digging up memories of fear, shame, and despair he thought long buried. It was not just a sound. It was a weapon forged from suffering itself, and it sought to hollow him out from the inside. One of his comrades screamed back, firing wildly into the trees, muzzle flashes erupting against the dark. The bullets vanished into shadows, striking nothing, yet the scream seemed to mock the attempt. It grew higher, sharper, the pitch climbing, until the soldier swore the world itself would shatter. His heart hammered, his breath came ragged, and he wondered if this was how sanity broke, not with blood, but with sound. The shriek ended as suddenly as it began, cut off mid-echo, as if the forest itself had been holding its breath. The silence that followed was worse, heavy and unnatural, pressing into the patrol with suffocating weight. The soldier's ears rang, the phantom of the cry lingering, filling the void with an ache that refused to fade. He swallowed hard, but the taste of copper clung to his tongue, and he realized he had bitten the inside of his cheek until blood ran. The men stood frozen, rifles trembling, their faces pale with exhaustion and dread. The sergeant barked for vigilance, but his own hands shook as he steadied his weapon. The soldier glanced at his comrades and saw the truth. Whatever courage they had carried into the woods had splintered. The scream hadn't just assaulted their ears, it had stripped them bare, exposing their deepest fears. Before they could recover, the second scream tore through the air, even closer than before. It was lower this time, guttural and raw, vibrating through the ground itself. Snow shifted under their boots, trees shook violently, and the soldier felt his ribs rattle as though struck by a hammer. He gasped, clutching at his chest, convinced his bones might crack under the force. The sound wasn't just outside anymore, it was inside, threading through his body like poison. The soldier stumbled backward, colliding with a comrade who had fallen to his knees. Both men stared upward, searching desperately for the source. For a heartbeat, they saw it. A vast shadow blotting out the stars, wings spread wide, claws glinting faintly in the moonlight. But then it vanished again, swallowed by the tree line, leaving only the echo of its hunger in the scream that split the night. The forest responded in kind. Branches snapped under invisible weight, snow fell in violent bursts, and the wind itself seemed to howl in mimicry of the monster. The soldier pressed his back to a tree, rifle raised, but his arms trembled too violently to steady his aim. The scream had left him broken, vulnerable, stripped of the soldier he had been only hours ago. Now he was prey, waiting for the strike. The third cry came without pause, higher and sharper than the last. It was aimed downward this time, funneled directly onto the patrol like a storm collapsing from the sky. Helmets rattled, teeth chipped, and eyes watered under the relentless force. One soldier collapsed, unconscious before he even hit the snow, his body twitching as though the sound itself had carved through his nervous system. The sergeant's commands blurred into nothing, his shouts carried away like leaves in a storm. The soldier barely registered his leader anymore. All that existed was the cry, the pressure, the unrelenting assault on his senses. He gritted his teeth, blood dripping from his ears, his vision swimming with spots. Every instinct screamed to run, but his legs refused. He was locked in place, a prisoner of the sound. When the cry finally cut off again, the silence was suffocating, thick with dread. Men gasped for air, clutching their rifles like lifelines, their faces streaked with tears and blood. The soldier staggered forward, his body heavy, his mind fogged. Yet even in the pause, the damage lingered. He could hear whispers now, faint echoes of the scream, muttering words he couldn't understand but felt in his bones. The soldier realized, with a chill, that the cry wasn't just meant to terrify. It was meant to mark them, to brand their souls so the creature would always know where they were. Even if the sound stopped, its curse remained, clinging to them like invisible chains. The patrol could march 100 miles, and the monster would still follow. Snow swirled around them again, the storm thickening as though summoned by the sound. The soldiers struggled to see more than a few feet ahead, the whiteout closing in, but through the haze shapes moved. Not men, not animals, but shadows bending unnaturally, drawn to the lingering resonance of the scream. His pulse quickened. The forest itself seemed to have awakened, listening, watching, obeying the will of the creature. Another soldier broke, firing into the whiteout, his panic echoing with each shot. The gunfire rattled the night, but the scream returned almost instantly, louder than ever, drowning the shots in raw fury. The soldier dropped his weapon, clutching his head, crying out as though his skull might split apart. The Manananggal's voice wasn't just a sound, it was punishment, a reminder of their helplessness. The forest bent under the force. Trees leaned unnaturally, their trunks groaning as though bowing to the cry. Snow erupted from the ground, dislodged by vibrations too violent for nature. The soldier felt himself collapsing inward, every muscle trembling, every thought shattering. He wanted to fight, to fire, to scream back, but his body betrayed him. The scream had stolen not only his strength, but his will. Then, as quickly as it had come, the cry vanished again, leaving silence thick enough to suffocate. The soldier dropped to his knees, chest heaving, tears freezing on his cheeks. Around him, his comrades stood broken, their faces pale, their bodies shaking. Even the sergeant had fallen silent, his eyes haunted by the realization that command meant nothing here. This was not a battle they could win. The soldier pressed his hand to the snow, grounding himself, trying to remember who he was. But the echoes still lingered, coiling in his ears, whispering promises of doom. He realized then that the scream had changed something inside him. He would never hear silence the same way again. The forest had taken his courage, and the monster had replaced it with fear so deep it would never leave. As the squad stumbled forward, broken and dazed, the soldier lifted his eyes to the tree line one last time. The storm parted for a heartbeat, and there it was, perched among the branches, wings spread wide, eyes glowing with hunger, its mouth opened in a grin too wide for anything human. The soldier knew then the scream was not meant to kill them. Not yet. It was meant to soften them, to savor them, and the true hunt had only just begun. The first shot was fired in panic, a reflex more than a strategy. The muzzle flash tore the night apart, momentarily illuminating the tree line, but it revealed nothing, only swirling snow and twisted shadows. The soldier's heart sank as he realized the bullet had hit nothing but bark. The Manananggal was too fast, too cunning, always one step beyond their reach. Still, the gunfire began to spread, breaking the fragile silence that had held them captive. The squad followed instinct, not orders. Rifles cracked in every direction, bursts of light strobing against the darkness. Each man aimed at movement only he could see, illusions painted by fear and exhaustion. Bullets splintered branches, shredded the snow-covered ground, but the air above remained filled with the whisper of wings. The soldier fired too, his finger locked on the trigger, but even as he did, he knew the truth. They were wasting their strength against shadows. Then came the sound of impact, not from their bullets, but from the creature itself. A branch snapped overhead with a thunderous crack, and something massive swept through the canopy. Snow cascaded like an avalanche, blinding them, choking their lungs with cold powder. The soldier coughed violently, blinking against the haze, and through the white blur he saw it, an outline, too large, too distorted, gliding between the trees with impossible grace. He raised his rifle, firing again, the recoil jarring his shoulder. This time, the bullet struck. He saw the creature flinch, its body twisting unnaturally mid-air before vanishing into shadow. For a heartbeat, hope surged. Maybe it could bleed, maybe it could fall. But then came the cry, a guttural roar of fury, far louder than before, shaking the forest like thunder. It wasn't the sound of pain, it was laughter, mocking their attempts. The men reloaded quickly, hands trembling, adrenaline surging through their veins. The sergeant barked orders now, his voice desperate but commanding, pulling them into a tighter formation. "Aim high. Don't waste shots," he shouted. Though his own rifle fired blindly into the dark, the soldier obeyed, aiming skyward, squeezing the trigger until the barrel glowed faintly against the cold. But every shot that found its mark seemed to vanish, swallowed by flesh that refused to fall. Suddenly, the wings dove. A rush of air slammed into them, knocking several soldiers off their feet. Claws scraped against helmets, tearing steel as though it were paper. The soldiers spun, firing point blank into the blur of movement that passed overhead. Sparks flew where bullets struck, and he swore he saw dark liquid spray into the snow. For one wild second, he believed they had wounded it. But then from the shadows came a shriek of delight, not agony. The Manananggal darted between trees, faster than the eye could follow. Bullets chased it, trails of fire cutting through the night, but it twisted and turned, its movements unnatural, almost joyous. The soldier realized then that the creature was letting them shoot, letting them believe they had a chance. Each bullet that struck only fed its hunger, each shot that missed drained their strength. The battle was not a fight, it was a game. The forest lit up with gunfire, a storm of bullets cracking through the storm. But for every shot fired, the Manananggal seemed to grow bolder. It swooped lower, its wings slicing the air like knives, its claws leaving gashes in the trunks that lined their path. The soldier turned sharply, catching a glimpse of its face, a hollow mask of stretched skin, eyes glowing with malice, teeth slick with darkness. He fired again and again until his rifle clicked empty. Panic surged as men fumbled with magazines, their hands too numb from cold and fear to reload quickly. The sergeant shouted for discipline, but discipline was gone, replaced by chaos. The creature took advantage, swooping low again, this time dragging one soldier upward into the tree line with a scream that froze the blood in their veins. His rifle clattered to the ground, firing one last desperate burst as his body vanished into the night. The soldier stared at the fallen weapon, his chest heaving, rage flared through his fear. He slammed a fresh magazine into his rifle and aimed into the dark. His finger hesitated, trembling before squeezing the trigger. The shot rang true, striking the shadows where the scream had gone. Another cry followed, louder, angrier this time. For the first time the soldier felt it, resistance, not victory, not triumph, but proof that their bullets could hurt, even if they could not kill. The squad rallied, pulling closer together, firing in bursts instead of chaos. Their shots lit the clearing, weaving a wall of steel into the night. The Manananggal circled, shrieking, its wings cutting wider arcs, slower now, more deliberate. The soldier clenched his teeth, realizing they had drawn its attention fully. This was no longer play. They had earned its wrath, and wrath was far more dangerous than hunger. The storm thickened, snow driving harder, wind howling through the tree line. Bullets vanished into the whiteout, their effectiveness fading with each passing second. The soldier wiped ice from his eyes, his arms aching, his rifle heavy. He wondered how long they could keep this up. Ammunition ran low, discipline frayed, and still the creature flew, circling above, patient, enduring. It was unholy, yes, but worse, it was tireless. Suddenly, it dropped again, this time striking the ground with a thud that rattled the earth. The soldier staggered back as a massive wing slammed into the snow, scattering men like dolls. He fired point blank into its chest, screaming as the recoil tore through his shoulder. Bullets ripped into its ribs, tearing holes that oozed something black and foul-smelling. For a moment the monster reeled, its form shuddering, and then it smiled. The grin was stretched, grotesque, teeth jagged and endless. Blood or something like it dripped onto the snow, sizzling as though acid. The soldier's stomach turned, his heart clenching in horror. Their bullets had landed. They had torn into its flesh, but instead of weakening it, the creature seemed to feed on the damage, its laughter echoing louder, hungrier, stronger. This wasn't battle, it was communion. The sergeant screamed for retreat, desperation cracking his voice. The men turned, firing wildly as they stumbled backward, their boots slipping in the snow. The creature lunged, claws carving trenches into the ground, wings folding and snapping like sails in a storm. The soldier reloaded again, his last magazine slamming into place. He knew it wouldn't matter. Still he aimed, still he fired, not out of hope, but out of defiance. Every bullet was a scream of resistance, Every shot, a denial of the inevitability that loomed above them. The forest rang with fire, the storm lit by flashes of desperate courage. But for every second they fought, the Manananggal seemed to grow bolder, its laughter carrying over the chaos. The soldier realized with hollow dread that they were not fighting to win. They were fighting to survive a little longer. The creature rose into the air again, wings blotting out the moon, its body twisting as though it had no bones. Claws stretched wide, its shrieks splitting the air once more. The soldier's rifle clicked empty, the silence of the weapon louder than the storm. He dropped it, pulling his sidearm with shaking hands, firing into the sky. Each shot vanished into the dark, meaningless, futile. Yet still he pulled the trigger, until even the pistol fell silent. When the last echo of gunfire faded, the forest returned to silence. Snow fell heavy, covering bullet casings that littered the ground like confessions of their futility. The men stood gasping, weapons empty, spirits shattered. Above, the Manananggal hovered, untouched by exhaustion, glowing eyes fixed on them with a hunger that no bullet could satisfy. The soldier felt his knees weaken, his chest hollow. They had thrown everything they had into the night, and it hadn't been enough. For the first time, the soldier understood the truth. Bullets could pierce flesh, but this thing had no flesh to pierce. It was hunger given form, curse given wings, a nightmare that thrived on their resistance. Shooting it was like screaming at the storm. It only proved they were afraid. And in that moment, as the Manananggal spread its wings wide over the broken squad, he knew they had not fought it, they had only fed it. The forest seemed to quiet after the last volley of gunfire, but the silence wasn't relief. It was dread preparing to take shape. The men steadied themselves, weapons empty, breaths heavy, as they scanned the tree line. The soldier's hands ached from gripping his rifle too tightly. Though there were no more bullets to fire, he told himself the monster had retreated, wounded by their defiance. But deep down he knew better. The stillness was only the pause before something worse. Then came the sound, not the whisper of wings, not the shriek that split the night, but something more grotesque, a tearing, ripping noise, as though flesh itself was being pulled apart. The soldier's stomach clenched as he listened, his mind struggling to place the sound. It echoed through the trees, wet and deliberate, sending shivers up every spine in the squad. Something was happening out there, something unnatural. The shadows shifted, and for a heartbeat, the soldier thought he saw two shapes moving instead of one. His eyes darted between them, confusion clouding his vision. Had there been two creatures all along? But no, the movement was wrong, unsteady, as though one form was splitting into another. He blinked against the snow, his breath catching in his throat, and then he saw it clearly. The Manananggal was tearing itself in half. Its body contorted grotesquely, joints snapping, flesh bending in impossible ways. With a sickening crack, its torso split from its lower half, wings stretching wider as if fueled by the separation. The soldier gagged, bile rising in his throat. No creature of flesh and bone should have been able to divide itself and remain alive. Yet here it was, its upper half hovering above while the legs remained rooted in the snow. The upper body rose higher, its claws twitching, its wings spreading wide like sails of shadow. The soldier could see the entrails dangling from its torso, slick and glistening, trailing like ropes in the wind. The sight burned into his mind, every instinct screaming that this was no longer even remotely human. This was a nightmare masquerading as a living thing, a perversion of life itself. He whispered a prayer, but his voice cracked under the weight of what he saw. The lower half remained standing, legs frozen in place, rigid as statues. Steam rose from the wound where the body had split, curling into the cold night air like smoke from a cursed fire. The soldier wanted to look away, to close his eyes and deny the vision, but he couldn't. His gaze was locked, transfixed by the blasphemy of motion and stillness combined. It wasn't just terrifying, it was wrong in a way the mind could barely comprehend. One of the men shouted in disbelief, stumbling backward, his voice shrill with panic. "It's not possible," he cried. The sergeant silenced him with a glare. But even the sergeant's lips trembled, his authority crumbling in the face of such horror. The squad raised their empty rifles as if the gesture alone could protect them, but the soldier knew the truth. Weapons had no meaning against a thing that could divide its own body and continue to hunt. The upper half of the Manananggal swooped downward suddenly, its entrails swinging like chains, smearing the snow with dark streaks as it passed. The men ducked, some falling to the ground, clutching their helmets. The soldier felt the rush of air, the stench of rot and iron, the cold kiss of unnatural presence brushing against his cheek. His heart raced as he realized that this form, grotesque and unbound, was faster, freer, deadlier than before. The wings beat once, sending a storm of snow and broken branches into the air. The soldier shielded his face, coughing violently as debris stung his skin. When the air cleared, the torso hovered above them, its face contorted in something that resembled a grin. The eyes glowed brighter now, fueled by hunger and cruelty. The soldier's legs trembled beneath him, his mind begging him to flee, but his body refused. He was rooted to the spot, just like the lower half of the creature below. The lower body shifted suddenly, moving without command, its legs marching aimlessly in the snow. The sight was more horrifying than the wings above. The soldier watched as the torso-less half stumbled forward, dragging itself like a puppet controlled by unseen strings. It had no eyes, no arms, no will, yet it walked. The soldier realized then that the body was not dead. It was waiting for the return of what had left it. The men panicked, shouting to one another, their voices rising in desperation. Some fired their sidearms at the legs, bullets tearing holes into the flesh, but the body did not fall. It staggered, stumbled, but rose again, resilient in its emptiness. The soldier's breath caught as he realized the truth. They weren't fighting an enemy. They were witnessing a curse that refused to die, even when divided. Above them, the torso shrieked again, the sound sharper and more piercing than ever before. It wasn't the scream of pain but of triumph, a declaration that it was stronger now than it had been whole. The soldier clutched his ears, teeth grinding as the sound rattled through his skull. The forest echoed with its cry, branches snapping as though bowing to its dominance. The night belonged to it, body divided or not. The torso dove, claws outstretched, striking the snow where a soldier had stood moments before. He rolled aside just in time, his weapon clattering from his grip. The creature rose again, entrails dragging across the ground, leaving steaming scars in the snow. The soldier scrambled to his feet, chest heaving, his eyes wild. Every attack reminded him that they weren't just facing a predator, they were facing something unholy, untouchable. The sergeant tried to rally the men, his voice hoarse and strained. "Hold your ground," he barked, but the command sounded hollow against the shriek that followed. The men tightened their circle, weapons raised, but their formation was fragile, crumbling under fear. The soldier's pulse hammered, his thoughts fracturing as he tried to decide whether to aim at the wings above or the legs below. Neither seemed killable, both seemed eternal. Snow swirled harder, the storm thickening until the forest became a white void. The soldier lost sight of his comrades, their shapes swallowed by the blizzard. All that remained was the sound of wings above and the shuffle of legs below. He spun in circles, panic clawing at his chest, his breath tearing from his lungs. The storm was no accident. It was part of the horror, part of the hunt. The Manananggal thrived in chaos, and chaos was consuming them. The torso swooped again, this time close enough that its claws scraped sparks from a soldier's helmet. The man screamed, staggering as blood streaked his face. The soldier fired blindly upward, his shots vanishing into the storm. For a heartbeat, he thought he had missed again, but then came a hiss, guttural and furious. His bullet had struck, but the grin that followed told him it hadn't mattered. The wound was nothing but an invitation for more. The legs stumbled closer, moving as if guided by the shrieks above. They stomped through the snow, heavy and deliberate, as though anchoring the horror to the ground while its wings claimed the sky. The soldier realized with dread that the body's division wasn't weakness. It was strategy. One half could stalk from above, the other from below, leaving nowhere safe, no escape possible. The soldier felt his strength draining, his lungs burning with each breath of icy air. He tightened his grip on his rifle, though it was useless, and stared into the storm. The creature circled above, its torso dangling entrails that dripped onto the snow, hissing as they burned holes into the white. The legs marched closer, their movements steady, unrelenting. The soldier whispered a final prayer, not for survival but for courage to face the horror. When the scream came again, louder and sharper than before, he understood the truth. This was not a beast to be hunted, not a curse to be broken. It was hunger eternal, a nightmare that divided itself only to grow stronger. The soldier steadied his breath, staring into the storm with hollow eyes. They had fought, they had fired, they had endured. But nothing could prepare them for the horror of a body divided. The storm finally broke near dawn, snow settling into silence as the winds eased. The men staggered through the drifts, their bodies bent and broken, their faces pale with exhaustion. The Manananggal had vanished back into the tree line, its screams fading into memory, but its presence lingered like a shadow over their souls. Each survivor carried more than wounds. They carried the mark of fear carved deep into their minds. The sergeant forced them forward, his commands quiet and hollow, more ritual than leadership. His voice no longer carried authority, it carried desperation. The squad followed because they had nothing else. Their boots dragging, rifles limp in their hands, they weren't soldiers anymore. They were ghosts stumbling back toward camp, shells of men who had seen something no human should ever see. One man whispered that it had been a dream, a hallucination born of exhaustion and cold. His words hung in the air, fragile and unconvincing, until another soldier broke down laughing, the sound sharp and hysterical. The laughter ended in sobs, his shoulders shaking as he collapsed into the snow. No one helped him. No one could. The soldier realized then that denial was impossible. They had lived through something beyond reason. The forest seemed calmer now, almost serene, but the silence was crueler than before. Every crack of a branch, every flutter of snow, echoed like the whisper of wings. The soldier kept glancing at the tree line, half expecting glowing eyes to appear once more. Even in absence, the creature owned them. It didn't need to attack again. It had already won. When they reached the river that marked the edge of their patrol zone, the squad paused. Not one man spoke. The water flowed black and slow, its surface coated in thin ice. The soldier stared into it and saw his reflection, but it didn't look like him anymore. The eyes that gazed back were hollow, haunted, carrying something that would never wash away. He turned from it quickly, ashamed of the man he had become. Back at camp, the survivors were greeted with confusion and questions. Their uniforms were torn, their faces bloodied, their bodies trembling. Officers demanded explanations, reports, answers. But when the men opened their mouths, no words came. Silence fell thicker than the storm they had escaped. The soldier tried to speak once, but his throat locked, his voice crushed beneath the memory of screams. He shook his head and said nothing. Rumors spread quickly. Of course, some claimed the squad had encountered deserters or bandits. Others whispered of wolves or rebels haunting the woods. But those who looked closely at the survivors knew better. Their silence was too deep, their stares too hollow. Whatever had happened out there wasn't human, and the men would never share it. The truth was too heavy for words. Nights at camp became unbearable. The soldier lay awake, staring at the canvas ceiling above him, his ears straining for the faintest sound. Sometimes he heard it. The beat of wings, the echo of a scream carried by the wind. He would sit up, rifle in hand, but nothing was ever there. Sleep became a curse, not a relief. Dreams replayed the hunt, twisting into endless cycles of claws, screams, and entrails swinging in the dark. One by one, the survivors began to change. Some drank heavily, drowning their memories in bottles. Others isolated themselves, refusing to join the mess hall, speaking only when forced. A few transferred away, desperate to leave the region, but even distance didn't free them. The soldiers saw it in their eyes before they left. The same hollow stare, the same mark of the curse. The Manananggal didn't need to kill them to win. It had already claimed them. The sergeant fared no better. Once iron-willed and commanding, he now barked orders with a voice that cracked, his hands trembling even during routine drills. His eyes darted constantly to the tree line, as though expecting the wings to return at any moment. The soldier pitied him, but also feared him. If the strongest among them could break, what chance did the rest have? Days turned into weeks, but the silence of the survivors never lifted. Officers pressed harder, demanding reports, but the men only shook their heads. Some claimed they couldn't remember. Others said nothing at all. The soldier kept his silence, not because he couldn't speak, but because he knew words were useless. To describe what they had seen was to relive it, and to relive it was unbearable. At night, the soldier found himself wandering to the edge of camp, staring out at the tree line. The forest loomed, black and endless, hiding its secrets in shadow. He swore he saw movement sometimes, branches swaying when there was no wind, shapes slipping between trunks. He never told anyone. There was no point. The others already knew. The Manananggal never truly left. Some nights, the soldier heard faint laughter carried on the wind, brittle and sharp. It echoed in his chest, reminding him that silence wasn't safety, it was patience. The creature had retreated, yes, but not defeated. It was waiting, circling somewhere above, ready to return when hunger called again. The soldier shivered, pulling his coat tighter, but the chill came from inside, not the cold. Weeks later, one of the survivors went missing. His bunk was empty, his gear untouched. Search parties combed the woods, but no trace was found, not even footprints in the snow. Whispers spread quickly through camp. Some claimed desertion, others muttered of wolves, but the survivors knew. They met each other's hollow stares and understood. The Manananggal had come back for what was already marked. The soldier carried on, performing duties with mechanical precision, but his spirit was fractured. His comrades moved like shadows beside him, their silence a constant reminder of the night they should never have survived. He wondered if survival had even been a blessing. Perhaps it would have been easier to vanish into the snow like the one who was taken. At least then the haunting would have ended. Years later, long after the war had ended, the soldier still carried the memory. He never spoke of it, not once, not even to family. When asked about the war, he spoke of battles, of frostbite, of long marches in the snow. But never of that night. That night belonged to silence. That night belonged to something no human tongue could describe. Sometimes in quiet moments he still heard it, the whisper of wings above his roof, the faint echo of a scream carried by the wind. He would sit awake until dawn, rifle by his bed, waiting for something he knew would never leave him. Survival hadn't freed him. It had chained him to the memory forever. And so he lived with the curse, like the others, his silence his only shield. For in the end, it wasn't death that the Manananggal had given them. It was memory, a memory so sharp, so unbearable, that it silenced their voices for the rest of their lives. The soldiers survived that night, yes, but they never truly returned. They became survivors who never spoke again. When dawn finally broke, the soldiers returned, but none of them spoke of what they had seen. Their uniforms were torn, their eyes hollow, and their silence carried more weight than any report ever could. They had faced many enemies in battle, but this one had no uniform, no strategy, no mercy. It had wings, hunger, and a scream that still echoed in their bones. The Manananggal was no story told by firelight. It was real, and it had chosen the night sky as its battlefield. Some wounds heal, but others remain unseen, etched deep into memory, resurfacing every time the moon rises high at midnight. Remember this, not all monsters hide in legends, and not every enemy walks on the ground. Some wait above, silent, until it's too late.